So welcome to the ACTL meeting Wednesday, March the 3rd. We appreciate everyone's time in being here tonight. We have a very packed agenda. So we're going to be hearing a lot of updates for work that the APS has been doing over the course of several months. First will be the distance learning task force output. Then we will have an IPP update. And then lastly, of course, as of last week, we are now officially in budget season. So we will also get a budget update. So with that, up first will be our DTL task force outputs. So I will turn that over to Bridget and let me know which deck you want me to share.
Oh, hi, everybody. I had planned on having a web cam, so it didn't look like I was looking down at you. My camera is not at a great angle, but you know, when technology doesn't work, you roll with it. So, Rebecca, I had sent you a distance learning, like a 3-slider of the task force. If you can pull that up, then we'll do that. And I dropped a lot of files on Rebecca at the last minute. So, I do, as she's pulling that up, I do want to thank, we had several members of ACTL participate in the distance learning task force. And I want to thank all of you who gave of your time and your energy and your expertise. We really benefited from hearing from your perspective. So thank you for that. The distance learning task force was a convened really with the express purpose of, with the understanding that all of our students are going to continue to engage in distance learning throughout the rest of the year in different iterations. So for example, all of our students will continue with asynchronous Mondays. Our pre-K through 2nd grade students will spend 2 days, those students who are reporting in hybrid will spend 2 days with their teachers in person and then transition to 2 days with their teachers in distance learning. And then we have students whose families have elected to continue with distance learning. And then the kids in the concurrent model will be participating with their in-person classmates together. So a lot of different iterations of distance learning. And so we really felt it was important to take a look at, you know, how can we continue to build on students' academic achievement, and their social emotional growth in distance learning, and what are some of the issues to which we could potentially provide solutions and strategies. So if you go to the next slide, Rebecca. The distance learning task force was comprised of 75 folks, and that was, as you can see on the slide, teachers, students, administrators, ITCs, student services staff, parents, advisory committee members. We had a whole lot of folks who were involved, and we met for 6 weeks from January 6th to February 17th. And again, as I said, we were looking to really focus on key issues and try to identify some strategies and solutions to those issues. So we spent 1 week taking a look at the feedback that we had received from several focus groups that we had convened in November. So looking at those feedback and specifically looking at strategies and solutions. And I'll use as an example our pre-K through 2nd grade group in the focus group had really identified that there was a real need for kids to be able to have opportunities to socialize with their classmates. So sort of some unstructured time for them to be able to practice their social skills. Another example that came out of the focus group and then was reiterated in the task force for our pre-K to 2 students was that students needed a blend of working on their iPads and being able to work with pencil paper and manipulatives, et cetera. And so how do we sort of expand the repertoire beyond using the iPad? So that was one committee we focused, or one meeting we focused on the sort of the focus group feedback. Then the next meeting, we took a look at the progress reports that the ACTL committees provided, and really sort of dug deep into what the ACTL committees said was going well, according to their sort of content lens, and what needed work. Another meeting, we looked at the possible disparities between the experiences of students in distance learning versus kids who were coming in hybrid, and vice versa. But because this was a distance learning task force, we focused largely on the kids who were participating virtually. And if there were going to be sort of disparities in experiences, what could we do about that? And I'll use as an example our CTE subcommittee really focused on kids in person or getting that hands-on application of skills and knowledge that perhaps the kids via distance learning would not have that. And so how could we bridge that gap? And I'll use as an example the auto tech class at the Career Center has kids who are there in person and kids who are participating via distance learning. And those students who are participating via distance learning have the benefit of a webcam that is being pointed at the car and are directing the students in person what to do. So while they can't get their hands on the carburetor, they're able to give directions to their classmates. And I think, as any of us have learned who have had to give directions to someone, that's an art. And so they're really able to participate in other ways. So that's one example of what a solution we came up with as we were looking at the discrepancies. And then the second to last session, we had an opportunity to learn about Canvas and Microsoft Teams, and what are some of the challenges and a universal theme that came from not just the task force, but parent feedback and student feedback and focus group feedback was sort of the concern about the lack of consistent use of Canvas across our schools, and what could we do to systematize that a bit more. Our very last meeting was really focused on, we've learned a lot through distance learning, and so how can we leverage that learning as we look to the 22-23 school year. So some of the key takeaways, as you can see on the screen there, are, as I mentioned, a need for consistent use of Canvas, things like a common homepage and module templates, consistent access to assignments. With Teams, the regular access to breakout rooms, the opportunity to have private communication between teachers and students so that we can allow students to access help without potentially, stigmatizing themselves, and then having that sort of one-on-one with the teacher is really important. And then, of course, students' consistent use of cameras. And I will say, I'll pause on that. That was a real outcome of the distance learning task force, is that we changed our language. When the year started, we really made it optional. And that was in an attempt to ensure that students had privacy and didn't feel anxiety to have their cameras on at all times. But in getting the feedback from the task force and from teachers, the challenge of not being able to see your student, so you can't really gauge if they're really getting it. You don't know if they're experiencing social emotional distress. It's really challenging to build relationships if kids aren't putting on their cameras. So we changed our language and conveyed that to teachers and working with principals, that it's an expectation that students use their cameras. And if kids are struggling with that, then it's an expectation of our staff that they work directly with their students to try to unpack what the issue is, and to work with parents too, if there's a necessity there. Another key takeaway is that we continue to work to develop a shared sense of classroom community between our distance learning and our in-person students. So that example I used in our auto tech class is one way that by having the kids who are learning virtually interact with their in-person peers It helps to build community and collaboration across mediums. We do know that our students need access to supplies and resources and hard copies of materials. I will say that DTL provided distance learning toolkits for our pre-K through 8th graders at the beginning of this school year, and have continued to work with schools to hand out supplies and hard copies of resources as needed. And we want to make sure that our distance learning kids can actively engage with their in-person classmates, particularly in that concurrent model, as I've talked about before. So there were a lot of reams and reams of data that and feedback that we received in the task force, and that we're continuing to bring to teachers and to principals. The feedback that's germane to DTL supervisors, we're employing as well. So just because the task force is not continuing to meet doesn't mean we're not continuing to try to enhance the experience of our kids who are participating via distance learning. So I'll stop there and open it up for questions. And Rebecca, I'm going to let you tell me when it's time to stop talking, because it's time for the IB, if that works.
Yeah, well, I think, were you gonna switch over to the, after we'll take a few questions and then we'll do the org chart for a few minutes?
Sure. Happy to do that.
So we'll take a few questions. So Kelly, Bethany, any questions in the chat?
It looks like we have one question. Are elementary students in the concurrent model at a disadvantage if we compare them with the student who receives instruction within a classroom? I mean, I know we're only a day in, but do you have any feedback about that kind of overall experience?
Right. So I'm going to take it to the 30,000 foot view and then kind of bring it in. And I will say, several folks have quoted to me a conversation I had with Barbara Cannon in August, when we talked about the concurrent model and sort of its appropriateness for kids who are younger than high school. And at that time, I had said that no, it's not the ideal pedagogical model. And I will continue to stand by that. It's not ideal for students who are, younger than 15, I guess 14, 15 years old, because it does require a good deal of self-discipline, of the ability, enhanced executive functioning. And, our elementary kids who are in 3rd through 5th grade, mostly, we do have some schools who have brought it to their 2nd grade, are developing those executive functioning skills. And so it's not ideal. We had to move to the concurrent model because the model we have for our pre-K to 2nd grade is really staffing rich. It requires 2 adults for each classroom. And we weren't able to staff that for 3rd through 5th grade. So just kind of want to put that out there, that we recognize that in an ideal world, we would be in a different model. So that said, I don't feel that our elementary kids who are learning via distance learning in the concurrent model are necessarily at a disadvantage if the teacher is able to build that community and really focus on building that community. I mean, one of the good things is that kids don't have to change teachers. So they are moving into this concurrent instruction starting next week with an intact classroom community. So all the kids know each other. They've interacted with the same teacher. The teacher knows each of their children's strengths and challenges. And so now in moving into next week and beyond is the importance to set up new norms and expectations and community, with the understanding that we've got some friends who are learning from a distance, but that they are as much a part of the classroom as the kids who are right in front of the teacher. And so, for example, a lot of teachers are setting up their classrooms where they can see their distance learning kids in the, projected to the whiteboard in the back. So as they're talking to the class, they're talking to the kids in front of them, and they're talking to the kids in the behind them as well. They've also have plans to set up what we call sort of station rotation, where they might start, for example, in morning meeting all together, And in that case, then the kids in the class are turning around to face their friends who are projected. But then moving into a lesson, they may go small group with the kids who are in distance learning to begin with, or even chunking those, and then move small group with kids who are in person, come back together as a class. So those are two or a few examples of how we can really eliminate any sort of potential gap between the kids who are in distance learning and the kids in person.
Thanks. So I think there was one, I don't know, I thought I saw a hand, but now I don't, but I think there was one more question in chat, and then we'll move on a bit, and then we'll come back later. I just want her to quickly be able to present the org chart, and then we'll come back to that probably as part of the budget as well. But Jonathan has a 30-minute window, so.
I have a quick question, Rebecca, about the camera policy. I wasn't on the distance learning task force, but I am aware that folks on the task force representing the special education and disability community raised a lot of concerns about this. I also know that the Student Services Committee, the subcommittee of ACTL, had huge concerns about this. And I also talked to members of that committee, particularly relating to secondary schools. So I'm wondering what happened to those concerns, because I don't see this in this policy at all. And I'm very concerned about folks in these communities whose anxiety is raised because of this, who might feel bullied by teachers because of this, and unclear messaging going out, which is resulting in implementation all over the map. There was somebody at our school who lost an entire week of instruction fighting over the camera policy. And I'm wondering why those voices were not taken into account. I mean, I don't know that they weren't taken into account. I certainly don't see them in the output. So I'm very concerned about the impact, intentional or unintentional, on many of our vulnerable students of this camera policy and expectation.
Sure. So first I want to say this isn't a policy, this is a change in practice. But the other piece that I'd like to really point out is, while the expectation is, and the language that was used, that was shared with teachers and with principals, and then we sent it out to parents, is this is a gradual release. So if you have a student who is very anxious about the use of the camera, don't have the kid turn on the camera in class. Start with one-on-one in office hours or in interventions or perhaps in small group, and absolutely be working with the child to identify what that concern is and with the parent, and work through that. So to your point, Sonia, yeah, we've had several teachers who have sort of enthusiastically embraced this change in expectations. And my guidance has always been, start with the teacher. If that's not working, go to the principal, have the conversation. If the principal is made aware that kids are feeling bullied or intimidated or harassed, which is never our expectation, then we need to be working with that teacher to bring it down, bring the expectations down, lighten the tone, work directly with the students who are struggling with having their cameras on. So this was not a, let's rip the Band-Aid off at all. It was meant to be responsive to significant feedback that it's been challenging to have students' cameras off, and to recognize that not every child is alike, and that some students need more time and more one-on-one interaction in order to try to turn on their cameras and to, as I said, as a gradual release.
I just don't see that that's a job of the teacher, and students shouldn't be pushed into defending their anxieties or their issues, and having it drawn out. It just creates such anxiety even knowing that they're going to be asked that. And I was told that if the kids don't want to turn on their cameras, they don't have to. And that's not what I'm hearing.
So I think you are articulating at, I would say, our first semester practice, which was if kids don't want to turn on their cameras, they don't have to. And then we've learned a lot, right? So we have not delivered instruction through distance learning ever before. And so going through a semester in which it was really challenging to, as I said, to gauge body language, facial expressions. Are you getting this? How's it going? How's your mental health as well? We did change the expectation that we do have an expectation that students will turn on their cameras with support. So
can kids with IEPs change their IEPs to say no cameras because of whatever's going on for them?
Certainly that's up to each IEP committee to have that discussion.
And I am gonna move us on. We could probably talk about the camera policy for the next while, and I very much appreciate that. So I'm gonna we only have 5 minutes before Jonathan's gonna be coming on, but I'd like to take this opportunity. Bridget is gonna present the APS revised organizational structure that is part of the budget. Feel free to put questions in the chat, but we will probably come back to those. We won't have time to answer any right now, but you can, or think about them, and we'll come back to that as part of the budget conversation. But we'll take this next 5 minutes and have her go ahead and run through it. And this was the, I sent out to everybody. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to look at it. So I'm going to share my screen, Bridget.
All right, and since time is of the essence, I'll get started. So Dr. Duran has made some proposals, and as Rebecca said, it really is part of the budget proposal, his proposed budget. So looking at reorganizing what we know as executive leadership team that has, and I'm sorry, I've forgotten how many members existed, currently somewhere in the neighborhood of 9 to 11 assistant superintendents and executive directors. So as you can see here, he's looking to really reorganize his executive leadership team into 5 chiefs. Some are existing positions. So our chief of staff, Brian Stockton, our chief of diversity, equity, and inclusion, Aaron Gregory, and then the chief academic officer, which would be me. And then there's 2 positions that are new, the chief operating officer, as you can see in red, and the chief of schools, where you can see in purple. You'll see also up at the top that the assistant superintendent for school and community relations will report to the superintendent. And then a new position that the school board has recently approved, our in-house legal counsel will be reporting directly to the superintendent. So the next slide really outlines what we know as DTL and what it will become. So as you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, this is a new position that has been put in as a new budget request, the Director of English Learners. And the rationale for that was that we currently have directors of special education, and this would certainly allow to leverage some of the influence and the collaboration that we currently don't have. We have a supervisor of English learners, but we don't have somebody at a director's level. And with the responsibilities of our L office, managing the DOJ settlement agreement, which is a bit of a beast, and pushing forward many of the program evaluation outcomes of the L program evaluation, it was determined that a director of English learners was really necessary. You'll see that REAP is really, in effect, our adult L program. It currently falls under our CTE director, but we'll move over to the Ls to get a more streamlined focus. You'll see in CTE, not a whole lot of change except for the loss of REAP. Adult education is moving to the Chief of School Support's office, and then our Even Start program will also move along with our GED. Director of Curriculum and Instruction is Sarah, you'll see that most of the items listed in blue, not items, content offices listed in blue are the same. What's missing there is the Office of Professional Learning and the Office of Equity and Excellence, and they're going to be moving to other chiefs. And you'll also might have noticed that our Office of Early Child and Elementary Education is not there, nor is our Office of Secondary Education. They are both moving to the Chief of School Support. The coordinator of early childhood will remain and now will report directly to Sarah. There won't be any changes to special ed. So our special ed offices will remain within the academics office. And if you move to the next slide, so this is our school support office. You'll see the director of admin services, who is currently Jeanette Allen, serving in the interim assistant superintendent role, will move to school support. Assessment is moving out of DTL over to school support. The coordinator of restorative justice is a new position working in concert with folks at the county level. And then we'll be moving our welcome center as well. Our student services branch that is now in DTL will move over to school support. The principals will report directly to the chief, and then you'll see the director of secondary education and early childhood and elementary education. Adult ed will now report directly to the secondary ed. We move to the next slide. So this is our diversity, equity, and inclusion office. Our family and community engagement office moved over there in September, so that's not a new move with the reorganization. But our federal programs, which was in DTL, will move to DEI, and then our equity and excellence office will move as well. And next is so this is the COO. And we're moving information services, facilities operations, finance and management, and then HR. So now the way ELT is organized, there's a lot of lateral operations. In this way, it's moving it to be more sort of vertical. And then the last slide shows that our Office of Professional Learning will report now directly to HR, taking on then the responsibility of providing professional learning district-wide, as opposed to when it was in DTL, where it was more sort of teacher assistant instructionally focused. So I am more than happy to answer questions. I think when we move into the budget part, we can revisit the reorg. Happy to do that. But I think I'm 2 minutes into Jonathan's presentation now. I think, Rebecca, you might be muted.
Do I see Jonathan?
He's saying he needs the link to join, so let me forward that to him.
Okay, I don't see Jonathan. Yeah, so as soon as, so we're gonna, and I apologize, we're trying to get as much in as we can in this meeting. So if you, again, any questions or about the either distance learning or any of that feedback, and or about the organizational restructuring, again, please keep putting them in the chat. We've got some folks that are helping track that. So when we come back to the budget piece, we can get a budget update. And here's Jonathan. And we can come back to, any questions about the restructuring as well. And Jonathan.
See him?
There he
is.
Yeah. Sorry about that. So do you have the slides you're going to share? Do I need to share anything?
No, as long as I can project, we can, yep, I can pop it right up.
Okay, and do you just want to quickly, I know you presented earlier, but do you just want to just real quick introduce yourself?
Sure, of course, of course. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thanks for having me this evening. I'm Jonathan Teresi, the Director of Strategic Planning in the Planning and Evaluation Office. I've been working closely with Bridget and others in the on the IPP, and we have some updates tonight to share with you. We met back in the fall, and tonight's really to kind of share some highlights from the February 4th monitoring report, and most notably the suggestions from instructional leaders that came out of some visioning work we did with them this winter. And we'll share that update, and then we've gave plenty of time for questions. So we'll be eager to hear your feedback and questions from the group. All right, let me go to share screen. Oh, it says host disabled screen sharing. You're on mute, Rebecca, I think.
Oh, how's that now? I think I just,
Okay, let's see. Okay. Perfect. Yep.
okay.
Good to go. All right, share. Go to start show. Okay. So the agenda, this will take about 10 minutes or so, but just briefly, a brief recap from the December update on the purpose and the goals of the IPP, our existing programs, and the visioning process, and then really focusing our time on the suggestions from the leaders and our community engagement that, that we completed in February. So again, the purpose of the IPP is really to help define our role of our schools and how they all fit together in the various pathways that are existing pathways, and looking to create some of our new pathways, providing a list right now of our current programs and options in one location. Currently, if you want to learn about the range of what APS offers, you got to click on about 15 different links. So we're going to be centralizing that and in the process of doing that work. And really the key piece is providing that clear vision for the future that aligns with our mission and vision. So as we look to make recommendations about expanding programs, changing or modifying existing, creating new programs and program moves, consolidations, and at times could be an elimination of a program if it no longer fits with our mission, vision, and goals as a district. And also and identifying criteria that we will use to assess our programs. Next slide. So it's important because as we make decisions, we want to really have instruction out in front of that, guiding and driving our decisions. Again, we're an educational institution. We want to make sure we're doing what's best for students from an instructional perspective. And so as we develop the budget, the capital improvement plan, look at boundary processes, that we are having that instructional vision out in front. The IPP will also inform a lot of our instructional processes as we look at curriculum development, program evaluations, our program of studies. The IPP will play a role in that as well. And most importantly, providing multiple pathways to student success. There's no one-size-fits-all model, and we pride ourselves in providing options for our students to meet the various interests, goals, and needs that they have. And continuing to ensure that this work is aligned with our strategic plan, the profile of a graduate, and our equity policy. Again, ensuring equity and access in our programs, multiple pathways, as I mentioned, strengthening the existing pathways we have, finding those broken links, and at times maybe creating additional pathways for students. One of the things you'll hear about tonight is about creation of a virtual learning program. And so that could be a new pathway for some of our secondary students if that vision continues to move forward. Providing demographic diversity in our programs and schools, and assisting with managing enrollment as well. I think you've seen this chart before. This is really just an intention as kind of an inventory. We are very much committed to inclusion and continuing to work. Our the special education program evaluation that was completed, and our 5-year action plan really is helping drive and inform a lot of our IPP work around inclusion, around creating those, continuing to strengthen the ways in which you know, that the inclusivity within our schools. So these lines kind of show as demarcations, but that's the intent is really just to show what exists, not our vision for the future and how the various ways in which students participate in general ed settings, both our English learners and students with disabilities. In terms of criteria, we're continuing to develop that, and we're going to share an update. And actually in March, it's going to be in April now. We just actually moved the report to April to give our leaders some more time in March to do this work with the reopening. We are continuing to collaborate on program evaluations, really using the data from those and the findings to help inform our work. I know that's been a topic you know, of discussion, but one example I can share is the World Language Program evaluation was recently completed. And so that data is going to help inform the dual language immersion visioning process that we're going to begin this spring. So really being intentional and deliberate in using our program evaluations to inform our visioning work so that we're using data to help make those data-driven decisions that we know are so important. We have an audit. We've conducted the audit looking at all of our programs and how many students are enrolled, the breakdown by demographics, the neighborhood school, and links to the data on the options and transfers page. So if you go onto the IPP Engage page and scroll to the bottom for data sources, you can find the audit, and there's a trove of data there, and we're continuing to work through that and identifying different groups who are over or underrepresented and making plans to address those areas of need. For example, in the immersion program, we know there are certain groups that are underrepresented in that program, and certain, when we look at attrition, certain groups are overrepresented in attrition rates. So as part of the visioning process, we will be looking to address that. And so all of this data kind of feeds into the work as we look to drive improvement efforts in our respective programs. The visioning process, again, as we talked about earlier, it's a cyclical process. And we've got a lot of questions on that around, how is it a vision if the work is ongoing? And I think as we've shared is we really want the data in our to inform our work. And so, and I'll just stick with the same example. For the immersion program, we have the world language program evaluation to help inform that visioning process for the immersion program. That there'll be another evaluation completed as part of our policy in about probably 6 or 7 years. It's generally in that range. So when the next world language program evaluation happens, that's going to provide us a time to revisit the immersion program again and to see, do we stay the course with the vision we developed? Do we make any adjustments? And really continuing to refine our approach, through these evaluations that the program evaluations that happen at regular intervals right now. So that's why as you look at the range of programs and as evaluations are done on a cycle, that's how this work is kind of shaped as a process and a cycle, so that we allow that. It's not a stagnant process, it's fluid. Our suggestions from instructional leaders, again, we met with them throughout the fall and early winter. And in January, they came forward with some suggestions that we packaged in that February 4th report. We used the month of February to get input from stakeholders. We had about 550 participants in the community questionnaire across a range of schools and levels. And also at our virtual meetings, we had scores of representatives from the community at those meetings as well. So we did get a good broad cross section of the community in February, and are continuing to work on analyzing that those findings, and we'll be sharing that with the school board in April, and we'll have that information up on the website as well. Implementation, so any of the visions, excuse me, that may be adopted, we will start our plan for implementation and looking at what resources might be needed. And so, and all of the suggestions you're going to hear about tonight, we're saying that 2022, 2023 would be the earliest. And that again allows us to build in time for implementation planning and building into the next year's budget cycle if there are any resources we might need to implement the program or vision. So we want to make sure that we take our time and do our diligence and plan carefully and thoughtfully as we move forward. So again, instructional leaders focused on 5 topics in the fall. These were the 5 topics they delved into. And again, that was principals, DTL directors, supervisors, and specialists all met. The suggestions were developed based on these kind of objectives and guiding principles. Would the suggestion, would it strengthen the program and meet the needs of the students? Would it align with our core values and goals? Would it strengthen our pathways or create a new pathway? And could it potentially offer some cost savings and efficiencies in one or more areas? Again, as I mentioned, they would be for implementation in 2022 at the earliest. In some cases, it could be longer based on if it needs to be woven into a capital improvement plan process. So the suggestions, As we looked at the projections data for WNL, Washington Liberty, over the next 10 years, and also taking into account that one of the goals, as the school board indicated, is with the Ed Center opening, was to accommodate all of the students who were on the wait list for the IB program. Generally, each year, there are about 80 students who end up on the wait list for IB. When the Ed Center opens, the idea is that anyone who wants the program, who meets the criteria that they have, would gain acceptance. So looking at the projections, looking at IB, elimination of that wait list, accommodating all those students, there was still some access capacity at the Ed Center over the next eight years. And so instructional leaders posed a suggestion to kind of leverage the successes we're seeing from many students at the secondary level and create a virtual learning program at that site. That was one of their ideas that they shared for how to use some of the capacity. Another suggestion was to co-locate Academic Academy, a program at the Career Center, co-locate that with Langston at the Langston site was another suggestion from leaders looking at aligning those programs. English learner programs, there was just a recommendation, a suggestion to consider a visioning process to look more closely at these 4 programs and seeing if co-location or consolidating would achieve the goals. So maybe going from 4 sites to 3, from 4 sites to 2, if any of that would achieve those objectives that I shared earlier. They didn't land on, they just said that this is a topic that could be looked at further, a little bit deeper dive into the data to see if any of that would make sense from an instructional perspective. Neighborhood schools was really just reaffirming that our neighborhood schools are the core of APS. 80%, 75, 80% of all students will go to a neighborhood school through their K-12 experience, and they really provide that community hub for learning and other activities that bring the community together. A number of items for middle school seats. One was to make the Montessori Public School of Arlington a pre-K to 8 school. And that they should, future capital improvement plan should consider an opportunity to co-locate it with a middle school. And co-locating with a middle school would help ensure that students have access to a range of courses taught by teachers with secondary level certification. We see that a lot, particularly in 7th and 8th grade, with some students who might be accelerated in math and might need algebra 2 as an 8th grader. By being near a middle school, you're more likely to have a critical mass of students who need that course. Within an MPSA, a typical class is 60 students. They may not, have a critical mass to run an algebra 2 course, but if you're near a middle school, now you can. So that was some of the thought process behind locating it with a middle school. You also have all of the electives and extracurricular activities that a middle school, traditional neighborhood middle school would offer as well. Aligning programs with our K-12 feeder schools, looking again at program location, given our, again, some of our goals in the IPP around diversity and alignment, that was another area. And creating a virtual learning program for secondary students. This really piggybacked on that idea for the Ed Center, that could be a program for grades 6 to 12 students. And the last suggestion for middle school leaders was to reopen the Art and Communication Technology program at Kenmore to the lottery and accepting transfers from outside the boundary. That could be another way as leaders looked at the projections for the various middle schools. Thomas Jefferson and Gunston are going to be increasingly over capacity in the next several years, and Kenmore could potentially accommodate some students from that boundary. When this program was previously open for countywide transfers, the bulk of the students were from the kind of the neighboring TJ and Gunston boundary. So that in addition to instructionally, it creates a pathway, as many of our elementary schools have exemplary projects and programs around the arts and communication. It also is a capacity relief mechanism as well as instruction. So those were the suggestions. We, again, had a community engagement process. We focused on getting feedback in these 4 areas. I shared kind of how the respondents, and we'll be sharing that feedback back with our leaders this month for them to consider if they want to make any refinements or adjustments to their initial suggestions they shared at February 4th. So this feedback is important. It's being disaggregated and analyzed so that we can have our leaders review it and consider it as they make their recommendations to the superintendent. These are going to highlight some of the events we did. And again, our engage page is really going to is the hub for all information IPP. And next steps, following the April report, the superintendent's recommendations, we're going to kind of transition to the 2021-2022 IPP process. And a couple topics we have in the queue, as I mentioned, was the dual language immersion program. And another major topic in the queue is the Career Center site. There's been prior work on that site from BLPCs and work groups, but we now are going to refocus our attention on delivering a vision that's can be executed within the constraints in the budget, and that work will pick back up this spring as well. And there'll be more information shared soon on that process. But that was it. Hope I left. Stop sharing.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And I've noticed Bridget is trying to answer some questions in the chat, so just check there occasionally. But so I don't. Can you guys?
Yeah. Do you want me to,
Jonathan? Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So it seems like there's a few questions. I'm trying to. The Academic Academy has a focus on acquiring hands-on career and technical skills while getting a high school diploma, and this is done at the Career Center. Lumping this program with Langston, sometimes a program with kids ordered there by the court system, does not seem to meet the needs of each student groups and does not seem to be furthering equity goals. Can you speak to that?
So the students at Langston are able to access CTE courses as well at the Career Center. APS provides a bus for those students to come down and access the courses. So if this were to happen, the students in Academic Academy would still be able to access those career and technical education courses referenced. I'm not aware of anyone being ordered to Langston. That's more, I think, New Directions, where sometimes the courts are involved in that. But yeah, that was the CTE access. I think I answered that. I can. Yeah.
And then a question around the IPP existing programs did not include TJ High School for Science and Technology. And I believe it also didn't include Arlington Tech in some of the data, the survey piece.
Yeah, Arlington Tech is definitely included. TJ, yeah, is certainly an option, but we as APS can't control the curriculum, you know, and for that, it's certainly a program that Arlington residents can access. But in terms of like instructional oversight or any of that, that's not something within our purview. Bridget, that's correct, right? We don't, yeah.
And then another question was the IPP survey that went out to the community. I know there was a lot of feedback, chatter around that. How were you able to capture demographics to kind of help prioritize community groups and priorities around that survey? I didn't see that it captured that well whatsoever.
Yeah, so the demographic was about the school community that folks are affiliated with. We did not ask, you know, race or ethnicity or anything around that. We did not. That's kind of been an ongoing topic. Some of our surveys in APS do that, and some don't. And the decision was made to not include that for this particular survey. But we do know the various communities. Because that was indicated. So the 500 respondents, we know how many were from Montessori, how many were from Barrett, how many were from Gunston, Drew, and so forth. So we do have at least that information to see that it's, you know, from across the county.
And then I'm just trying to wade through these a little bit. It said neighborhood schools were not listed in the programs. Is this something that could be considered? It might make it more clear to parents to list all of the options in one place. I mean, I think it's kind of drinking from a fire hose, this whole project and the survey and everything. Just that's my personal.
Kelly, this is Bethany. Maybe I could chime in on that, because I think that for those of us who sort of go back a year or two plus following this, I know the school board had played around and I think reached a decision on sort of a definition, Bridget, about the IPP and the relationship of it to our neighborhood schools, which are sort of the heart and soul, right? And so very much this has been a topic of conversation, I know, in the past, and I'm sure you all are continuing it, but maybe you want to speak to that particular point about sort of the definition overall.
Yeah, Bethany, I'd sort of take that and run with it. May not get to your point, but I hope so as well. And I do want to loop in, there was another question in the chat about, kind of what happened to the initiatives that were identified in the 2019 IPP. And I do want to absolutely say they have not been lost. What we did was we brought those initiatives along with other initiatives that have been identified by our instructional leaders and sort of had them rank them according to priority. And so I'll use as an example, one of the items that was included in the 2019 IPP was potentially creating sort of an arts academy at Yorktown. That's definitely still on the list and something that we want to explore. So I want to emphasize that the 2019 IPP pieces have not been sort of lost, but are in the pipeline as part of this focus. But we did want to honor that, our instructional leaders identified, for example, looking at potentially visioning for our L secondary programs and looking to see what kind of instructional benefit might be if we co-located or moved them. As far as neighborhood schools, absolutely. And we really took a lot of effort in this IPP to one, acknowledge that 75% of our kids attend a neighborhood school, that it is the cornerstone of APS, that we want to make sure that our neighborhood schools are, that our kids are getting an equitable, a rich and engaging experience at our neighborhood schools, and that it is on par with many of our option schools as well. So that's something that we've highlighted as part of our framework and moving forward to as we go through sort of some of the evaluation and the criteria pieces to make sure that wherever you go to school in Arlington, you're going to have an equitable and engaging experience. I don't know, Jonathan, if you want to jump into that.
Yeah, no, and one of the other pieces just to add on, I think Bridget captured just about all of it, is many of our exemplary projects. We know a lot of our schools, and this kind of feeds into that Kenmore suggestion. As we were looking at Kenmore's art and communication technology, we realized that 2/3 of our elementary schools have some type of special focus project related to the arts, communication technology. And so in terms of a pathway, I'll use an example down at Drew. They have the county invested in STEAM labs down at Drew Elementary. And so Kenmore has those same labs. Many of the students in the Drew boundary feed into Gunston, but if they are interested in continuing in kind of that pathway, that by opening Kenmore, that could potentially create a pathway for those students who want to continue in kind of that specialized, STEAM type curriculum. And so a lot of our neighborhood schools have, they're all unique. They have distinct characteristics and different instructional, foci. And so as we look at our continuum of the IPP, a lot of that kind of feeds into this work. And that one example of Kenmore is just one of several around how neighborhood schools kind of tie into this work as well.
Okay, we have another.
Hold on real quick. I'm just gonna time check just real quick because we got the budget, which is another big one. So just probably 2 more questions. And again, please keep putting things in the chat. We'll take them out and send them on to Jonathan and Bridget, for IPP. So please put them in there. Please understand. We can't get to all the questions, and we appreciate all the feedback, and we will get back to you. So 2 more.
Okay, so then another one is from ACTL. Given the IPP focus on equity, access, and multiple pathways, how would consolidating or co-locating secondary EL programs improve instructional outcomes for students?
The irony is I was just responding in the chat about that. So, so thank you, Kelly, for bringing it to the forefront. So Jonathan, I'll start, and then if you want to jump in, one possible, and I really want to emphasize that this one is not a done deal. In fact, many of our instructional leaders felt that we needed to do some more visioning and thinking about this. But one possible benefit is that by co-locating some L programs, we can enhance and expand upon the existing staffing that is available. So by separating our secondary L programs at the Career Center, at HB Woodlawn, at Arlington Community High School, for example, and I know I've forgotten one as well, they each are sort of staffed according to the number of students who are in the program. But by bringing the students together, we can expand on that staffing, which then can also support their social emotional needs, and many of our L students have unique social emotional needs, some of their academic needs as older learners as well. So Jonathan, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, no, just that, and the supports. We know a lot of students need support, and so some of the sites, have a social worker maybe 2 days a week, but we build a more critical mass of students, and now it's maybe financially feasible to do 5 days a week for a social work or other staff who provide really some critical services and support to our students, support that they need to be available for learning. And so, some of that is around that work as well. So it strengthens instruction in sometimes these indirect ways, but by supporting the students more holistically and meeting their, the whole needs of the whole child, now they're more available for learning. So part of that was around that, looking at that as well as the centralization of some resources, because we know the smaller programs aren't always staffed at that level.
Okay, and one more question here. What is meant by aligning programs with K through 12 feeder schools that are equitable countywide? What are K through 12 feeder schools? And does the equitable countywide refer to the programs or the K through 12 feeder schools?
I think it's a little bit of both. One example we've heard from and we know exists when we look at the immersion program and you look at attrition rates from fifth to sixth grade, we see that there are some families that, in certain parts of the county who, don't want their kid on a bus for 45 minutes to an hour to go down to Gunston to continue on the immersion program. So we know like the distance, kind of the geography, the feeder structure of some of the programs that go across levels. Looking at the location of programs and seeing, are we able to serve the students? And it's not just, we have families on the north side and Halls Hill and Roslyn that are diverse communities that, it is a far distance to travel to access some of these programs. And some families don't have cars and public transportation may not be. So you can create some equity issues with the location of programs. And so just really continuing to dive deeper into that and seeing, looking critically from an equity lens at program location, and does it make sense in the future to create a second, to split a program, to relocate it, in the idea of ensuring equity and making sure that, we're serving our students and community well. So that, again, it's really, think just diving deeper into the data and looking at specific communities. But we do have some data, that shows attrition rates and shows participation rates in certain communities that are underrepresented, and how the feeder structure and geographic location plays into that.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us this evening and giving us that update. And I think in the agenda that I sent out, I also did include the link to the Engage page. So I'm sure Jonathan will be posting as we go additional information or updates to the calendar. I'm sure we'll have a chance to continue to follow this, obviously, and I encourage all of your schools and organizations to follow this. As I mentioned in the beginning of the year, I think this is, for teaching and learning and education, it's just a super critical component. So I would encourage everybody to continue to track it on the Engage page, and we'll bring it back when when there's an appropriate next step.
Sounds good. Thanks for having us. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it. Okay, so now on to the easy topic of the evening, the budget. So, Bridget, did you want me to pull up the superintendent's proposed budget deck?
Sure. I think given the limited time that we
Yeah.
have, Rebecca, if you'll also share the slide deck with folks via email.
And I have. Yeah, so everybody got the not only the deck from the 25th, but I also shared the work session
Great.
deck from
Okay.
the 25th.
So what I thought I might do is actually sort of cherry pick some slides that are related to DTL. And then if folks have questions outside of that, we can, certainly talk about that. So if you'll go to slide 15, actually, and on the budget, I think that will, there we go. Fantastic.
Okay.
Thank you. So what I'll do, folks, is share new budget requests that are germane to distance DTL. And I'm sure one could argue that other budget requests germane to the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion are also germane to DTL. But I'm going to sort of highlight some of these new budget requests and then happy to answer questions. And I did see there were a couple of questions about the reorg in the chat, and I'm happy to answer that too. So one of the new budget requests that we've put forward is an increase in American Sign Language interpreters and cued language transliterators. And that's really to ensure that we have appropriate staff to meet the demands and specific IEPs. And the change in the planning factor for pre-K assistance from 1 to 2 is also another IEP expectation that we're going to be able to support students who are in our special education pre-K classes. So the funding for a hearing officer is in addition to the legal counsel that you saw on the reorg. And that's in part because we are experiencing, along with districts across the country, there's been a real jump in OCR complaints and mediation needs. And so it's more fiscally, beneficial to us to have somebody on site who would be serving as a hearing officer as opposed to contracting that out. Next slide, please. So really for English learners, this the first two bullets are really focused on the DOJ settlement agreement. As part of the agreement, we are required to translate what are called essential documents for families as they engage in academic planning, certainly IEPs and other documents that might be deemed essential. And that is proving to be really costly. And so we need some additional monies to do that. We also put in last fiscal FY21 budget, we asked for $400,000 for the translation efforts. And of that $400,000, we hired a translation specialist. So that was a one-time request. And now we're looking to make that a permanent part of our budget. That person's job is solely to translate IEPs because each IEP is individualized. It's a much more cost efficient to have somebody on site than for us to use contractors to do those translations. The director of English learners, that is a part of the reorganization. So you see that as a new budget request as well. And if you'll go to the next slide, then you see a series of screeners. So a social emotional learning, a universal screener, which we have not had. And then what we know as DIBELS, and you've seen we've reported out DIBELS scores in recent monitoring reports. So it's really being used to replace the PALS screener and to more efficiently identify students who might be in need of additional support for reading intervention. So the student behavior and climate coordinator would fall, will have a restorative justice focus to it, and it will work with the county in that regard, and that you'll see that in under the administrative services piece. The teaching and learning data coordinator, I want to emphasize this one because I know that data is has been sometimes a bone of contention and a lot of questions about what data can our content supervisors produce, and who, if we have to rely on some of our colleagues. We don't have currently a data coordinator. So if you're asking for the math data, that's coming from the math office, and sometimes it's got a level of complexity that would require the math office to, put everything else aside and do data crunching. And so that's why, or that, fill in the blank. So we have asked for a DTL data coordinator so that we can certainly use student performance data in a way that will help inform instruction, but then also be able to provide to meet some of those data requests that we're receiving from our ACTL committees as well. So I did want to highlight that. The gifted services specialist, we currently don't have a gifted services specialist, just a supervisor. So we put a need for that because our Office of Gifted Services is K-12. And that's a massive lift for one person. You'll see resource adoptions for our ELA, and that's focusing on our structured literacy focus for French because we were not able to ask for resource adoptions last year, and our French program is sorely in need. And then the Spanish immersion language arts, that's sorely in need. As you know, our students in immersion take both English language arts and then they take Spanish language arts, and finding quality resources has been challenging. And so we need to put our money where our mouth is in order to be able to ensure that our kids in our immersion program are learning Spanish and doing it in a way that is promoting fluency and literacy as well. There are some testing materials and some other things that we've put in, but I think that pretty much covers GTL. Let me make sure on the next page, make sure I've covered it all. Yeah, and then we move into I think the next page is diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that gives you a pretty good coverage of our new budget requests. We have, because we have a $42 million deficit, each department was requested to put up some potential reductions. And Dr. Duran talked about having to go through some tiers of reductions if we're not able to close that budget gap in other ways. So that's the quick and dirty of it. But I'm more than happy to answer questions if you've got specific questions, and certainly circle back to the reorganization as well.
Do we want to start with the reorganization questions, or do we want to? Okay. So can you explain the difference between director and a supervisor position kind of under all of that?
Right. So I'll use the curriculum and instruction sort of ladder, if you will. So in each of our content offices, we have a supervisor. So I'll focus again on math. The supervisor of mathematics is Shannon Ellis, and then we have a secondary teacher specialist and a elementary teacher specialist because, mathematics is pre-K-12 and has a variety of courses and skill sets and assessments. It's really important that we have our teacher specialists who are working directly with our teachers and our math coaches. To use this example, Shannon is a P-scale, so she's in a supervisory mode and is helping to sort of direct the entirety of math. And then above Shannon would be Sarah Putnam, who is at the director level. And so she is in charge of all curriculum and instruction. And so really the difference between supervisor and director is sort of scope of responsibility.
Okay, great. And then can you give a little more information about the role of the school support position?
And, you know, that's a new position, so it's obvious, and a new office, so it's obviously going to evolve with the focus of the chief. But I think it hits on, or at least I hope that it will hit on one of those issues that we've talked a lot since I've been involved with ACTL, and that is sort of the development of the curriculum and then the fidelity of implementation. So for example, you know, in DTL, we identify best practices, we work with teachers to identify resources, we write curriculum, we put the curriculum in the teacher's hands, we provide professional learning, we give guidance and support, but at each school, it's really, you know, the consistency and the fidelity to that curriculum is often always evaluated by the principals and the assistant principals. And while we can certainly come in and provide support and guidance to our principals as well, at the end of the day, the buck stops at the school. And so to have that chief of school support who is supervising the principals, and one key thing I need everyone to know is that Dr. Duran and I agreed that we needed to co-locate those two offices. So the school support office will be located on the second floor of SciFax with the academics office. So we've got that proximity, can really leverage that communication and support. But you kind of look at sort of the development side as DTL, the implementation side is school support, is sort of in broad terms.
Okay. And then another just kind of reorg piece was why the director of early childhood and secondary went under the school support versus.
Right. Yeah. So the director of elementary and early childhood, Wendy Pilch, and secondary ed, Ty Bird, work very closely with principals. They observe a lot of classes. They sort of parse out some of the nuances. I know, for example, Ty has been really involved with our high school principals on the development and rollout of dual enrollment classes. So sort of interpreting VDOE guidance, helping to get some of these initiatives that we're developing in DTL sort of rolled out. So it made some sense that we would move them over to chief of school supports because we'd be working closely with the principals. And we'll highlight, however, so Wendy currently is the director of elementary and early childhood. When she moves over to school support, she'll likely be director of elementary. We've got to change that because Elaine Perkins, who is our coordinator of early childhood, will remain in DTL. So we'll kind of be separating that. That doesn't mean that Wendy's not going to speak early childhood. That is her second language, but that we do recognize that early childhood has an instructional component that we want to be able to keep in DTL.
Okay, and now on to, but there's a lot of questions. So we will do our best just to capture all these questions after to give to the larger group. So we won't get too specific, but maybe we can start talking about tier cuts and just like what the methodology was, you know, used to determine the tier, kind of overall.
So I'm going to speak specific to DTL because I know that the most, and looking at the deficit that we were facing, each department was directed to identify an X amount of cuts. For DTL, we were directed to identify about $3.5 million in cuts and to tier them. So tier 1 would be sort of the lowest level of cuts. Tier 3 would be the highest. And I have to say that we're at a point, certainly, you know, we can't afford to lose any of the reductions that we're suggesting we put up. But if we get into the range of tier 2 and tier 3, we're no longer sort of cutting into flesh, we're cutting into bone. So for example, we we ended up identifying, I think it was in the neighborhood of 9 staff positions along with a variety of services that would be included with the reductions. And so losing that number of staff would be really challenging and painful for us. So I know that Dr. Duran did not include any of the tiered reductions in his proposed budget. He brought forward a needs-based budget, but they are sort of itemized in the budget book. So you can kind of look through what constitutes a tier 1 versus a tier 3 cut.
Okay, thank you. And then there's so many questions, a lot of really good questions. So from Arlington SEPTA, like who would principals report to as far as this new structure? I think that's, we have that system of school system always said. So what, can you kind of give some more information around that?
Right. So I will say this, that, and I very much appreciate that Dr. Duran is including this as part of the budget process, in part because it costs money, but in part it gives us from February to July 1, when this will come into effect, an opportunity to kind of work out some of these details. So the org chart itself has the principals reporting directly to the chief of school support. I know Dr. Duran absolutely will be engaged in, working in concert with that chief on the evaluation piece, but currently it has them working with reporting to the chief of school support, which I think is helpful as we think about sort of the implementation piece, that having that level of influence as principals make determinations about implementing curriculum or assessments or using specific resources. I think that's helpful that the chief of school support will be working so closely with them.
And you're talking to a group obviously that loves data, that we love data. We really appreciate it. And there's just a lot of kind of questions around that. If this is not approved to kind of get that position, what is kind of the plan moving forward to keep that train moving as productively as possible?
Yeah, so this is where Bridget Loft riffs a little bit. So I'm not speaking on behalf of the institution at all, but I can share with you a little bit of my my experience. So now I've been in this job for 14 months, 12 of which have been in a pandemic. So, maybe what I learned in January or February of 2020, will come back into fruition. But I certainly was able to participate in, we have beginning of the year, middle of the year, and end of year meetings with principals who bring forward their progressive plans, their SMART goals for their schools, and have data. And I did participate in several middle of the year, and then a few end of the year meetings with principals, primarily probationary principals. And in having those conversations with Dr. Duran, I indicated that if the principals are, in that position to ensure implementation of curriculum, then I would very much like to participate in those meetings so that I can kind of see what the goals are, provide guidance and feedback to, in this case, Dr. Duran and Jeanette Allen, who are serving in the evaluative capacity of our principals. So if the chief of school support does not sort of materialize, then I would expect that I would have the chance to be working more closely with principals in that capacity.
Okay, and then how much does this reorganization cost, and how does it improve student achievement? Kind of what is the overarching?
Right. So my understanding is that it will cost in total about $80,000, and that there's been some reallocation of some certain positions. So that has allowed to keep the costs low. I believe in the addendum to the budget book, there's a more specific delineation of the costs of the reorganization. So I invite folks, and I know that's posted on the APS website. As far as student achievement, I'm going to come at this a couple of ways. One is I really do feel that having an L director, an English learners director, is going to be beneficial to that office. As I explained it with the reorganization, looking at that position, the L office has had a pretty heavy lift managing the really robust requirements of the DOJ settlement agreement, while also trying to push the needle forward with many of the really good and meaningful recommendations of their program evaluation. And that's hard to do when you've got a supervisor and a limited staff. So to have that director who can then interface, directly with directors of special education, with the director of curriculum and instruction, I think is going to help sort of streamline and move that improvement process forward. I also feel that having that chief of school supports co-located, that office co-located with DTL on the same floor and really engaging in some of that synergistic communication, we're going to get to really move the needle more towards the consistency of implementation in a way that we haven't been able to do that thus far, which then will result, I think, in increased student achievement.
Yeah, and just some comments just in the chat about, if it's possible to get a chart with names in it, just so we can kind of have a better understanding of who's going where. And there's just, I guess, some more questions regarding the goals around, just if there's some high level bullet points that we can share with the community or with our folks around that. And then just another theme, obviously, through the chat is equity being a priority. There are proposed reductions in new budget requests in this, I guess, in an addendum. There's an addendum floating around with, budget cuts. Concern with cutting the budget requests further. If APS is serious about equity, it needs to be fully funded. There's some questions about equity around the elimination of activity and late buses for athletics. How does that impact low-income students? Just overall, do we feel that this is really demonstrating a strong commitment to equity?
Yeah, that's a hard question to answer in the face of a $42 million budget deficit or a gap, right? So equity is important. And I think even in Dr. Duran's presentation, he italicized some of those new budget requests to highlight that those are meant to promote a more equitable experience of our students. The director of ELS, for example, would be one of them. Something's got to give, right? So in this particular case, one of the proposed reductions is that that cutting of transportation and with an acknowledgement then that that the impact that might have on our students. We're also saying that if we're going to cut after school transportation, then we are in effect really cutting into the after school experience for all of our students as well. So.
And this is a little bit of a specific question. The budget has a line item that envisions cutting a number of FTEs by reducing satellite Montessori programs. However, the individual school narrative shows 0 cuts in the FTE positions. Maybe that's a question we can kind of get back to. Does APS plan to eliminate all non-Montessori School of Arlington classes? I guess it seems to be a little confusion by that line item. When,
Right. So sorry.
No, go ahead, Bridget.
For that specific, and I'll just give some generalized information. So, the departments were required to make cuts, and so were schools. So the principals made some suggestions. So that particular cut of satellite Montessori programs, and I want to emphasize satellite Montessori programs came from the elementary principals. So there should be some description in that addendum as well.
Yeah, and we're almost out of time. So I just want to, again, please, if you haven't had a question answered, we're going to take all of these questions. I know that, what I've seen is there's a lot of very specific questions about tiered cuts. I'm sure Bridget will answer them the best she can. And I firmly believe that we hope the budget is fully funded. So I think probably at this point we advocate at the county board for extra money so that it is fully funded. So we are able to, get these much needed additions and not have to touch any of these tiered cuts at all. And I'm sure that's Dr. Duran's wish. If you listen to his presentation, he didn't want to talk about it, right? He's like, we're going to fully fund this budget. So, but we'll try to get as many answers as we have. And remember, this budget was just presented last Thursday. So if you again go to the Engage page, you can follow. There's a whole bunch of work sessions coming up, and you can directly, as an individual, and again, or as your PTA, or your organization, provide feedback to the budget. And there are multiple steps, as a lot of people are, are familiar with the budget process. And so we will come back to, once, this is the superintendent's budget, right? And then we'll get a school board, budget. And so we'll get an update, as we go. And it's end of April. When's the final adoption date?
Beginning the first week in May, I believe.
May, okay.
And I did want to highlight, Rebecca, that the DTL work session is on March 16th. So folks looking to spend March 16th, the evening of March 16th, happy to have you.
Perfect. So please encourage everybody. Obviously, this impacts everybody. So continue to follow it, again, from your school level and individually, and we will make sure that we bring updates and revisions to your attention, as we progress, and any other, again, feedback. So I know I feel like it's just been nonstop. So again, we had a really big night of a lot of information, but these are all, we couldn't really think of anything that wasn't important and wasn't incredibly timely with transitioning to hybrid, with the budget, with the IPP. So I really appreciate everybody's time and attention and amazing questions and engagement tonight. So thank you so much. We will save the chat and we will get that over to Bridget, Jonathan, and the folks that can answer it, and we'll send that out as soon as we can get some replies to it. So it is 8:30. Any last comments or questions real quick before we end on time? Awesome. Well, thank you guys so very much. Have a wonderful week, and we will talk soon.
Stay safe, everyone.